I would like to call the meeting to order at 9 tonight. Again, thank you all for coming, and look forward to having a productive meeting. Dana, what time do you set that we? 6:30. Roll call, please.
Quisenberry.
Here.
Rosales.
Here.
Schwartz. Here. Anderson.
Here.
Hartke.
Here.
Kibler.
Here.
Maxwell.
Here. I would like to note that item 8, approval of the Army Corps of Engineers lease, has not been completed yet by the Corps, and therefore I request that that be withdrawn from the agenda and that the agenda be approved as amended.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda has been approved. Request approval of the minutes for the March 3rd, 2015 meeting. Mr. Anderson moved. Second?
Second.
Mr. Hartke, thank you. All in favor of the?
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carried. Thank you. We are now at the point of public participation. Are we ready to go forward? Yes, because we have to. Okay. So we have so far one slip, and that is from Alex Pereira. Hopefully I didn't do too badly by that name. All right, thank you.
Good evening. So my name is Alex Pereira. I'm from Planners Network from UIC campus. And unfortunately, I had a little bit of a technical issue, but I do appreciate you guys trying to accommodate us. So I believe you all have a copy of this report that we prepared. And if you do, I think we should be able to follow the material along pretty well. So there's just a couple, we made a presentation here before where we raised most of the points that I'm gonna sort of refrain again today. I just want to point out a couple more issues and sort of show through the data that we have, to sort of paint a clear picture of this. So just to reiterate, we do think that the report, and I'm talking about the K&A report, did respond to the RFQ very well in the sense that the sort of needs assessment that it proposed and the plan that it developed for the, especially for the mental health inmates was very thorough. But the one point that we sort of it raised some questions to us is looking at the RFQ. The RFQ specified that that the report may include determining number of beds, and that all discussions should include the flexibility of the design to adapt to changing facility needs over time. So the RFQ seems to indicate that the Sheriff's Office, or whoever put out the RFQ, was looking for some flexibility in terms of the number of beds, and looking for the report to propose sort of different scenarios in that regard. But the report itself has a paragraph at the beginning that mentions how the Sheriff's Office indicated to the consultants that no such a projection was needed in the report. It does explicitly say that they were not required to include either a number of beds or a long-term projection of inmate population. So the one question that raises is, where does this discrepancy come from if you compare what the RFQs say versus what the Sheriff's Office allegedly later told the consultants? That is right now unclear, and I encourage you as a board to raise that question to the consultants later on. The other issue that I want to point out, and this we've already mentioned, but now I can show you the data. If you do have it in front of you, the gray box here, the pie chart that you see, that comes from our own data analysis. We FOIA'd some information from the Sheriff's Office in 2014, and we conducted our own analysis of the types of arrests. So this takes 1 day in 2014, and specifically here, October. We also did it for a day in September. And we analyzed the types of arrests of the inmates that were in jail that day. And it turns out that about 15% of those were there because of traffic arrests. And we found a very similar figure for the other day that we analyzed as well. And that contrasts very highly with the report that says that traffic violations were a mere 2% of the inmate population according to their analysis. And according to the report, their analysis was based on a 20-day snapshot between, I believe, April and July, which is a span of however many days, 120 or so. So the other question that raises is how those 20 days were selected. So how was that snapshot taken from the larger 3-month period, and how did they arrive at this figure? Because that contrasts very, very much with our own analysis and also previous reports that were done. And lastly, we just want to point out also that we've looked at other plans that were prepared by Kimmy Associates in the past, and in the back page of the report here, we gave you a couple of examples. So they had in Wisconsin and North Carolina, they did 2 projects, and in both of them, they showed that they have sort of an understanding and expertise on the issue of looking at how jail population is affected by sort of diversionary programs and pretrial programs and things like that. So it was interesting to find that they do come with that expertise, and that was something that was available for the sheriff's office to sort of develop on. And so just to leave you with some of the questions that this analysis raised for us. So what I've already mentioned regarding the 20-day snapshot that they've taken and how that was come about. Regarding something we already mentioned too is the fact that the operational costs were very sort of detail-oriented, but the construction costs were not. And why is that difference there? And I'm out of time. But lastly, and regarding that discrepancy between what the sheriff's office asked in the RFQ versus what they apparently asked in a private session. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any other individuals that would like to take part in the public participation portion of this agenda? If not, I will conclude that portion of this agenda and move on to the next item. Thank you. Under communications, do any of the board members or the committee members here have anything that they would like to communicate to the board and to the committee? All right. Hearing none, I will move on to the next item. The next item on the agenda is the Sheriff Operation Master Planning Questions and Answers with Gorski, Reefstack, Kimmy, and Associates. And I asked the team to come back this evening as part of the continuing effort to provide answers and an opportunity for committee members as well as board members and members of the public to submit questions again to the team. Now, the public, I encouraged the public some time ago, if they have these kind of questions, do get them to their appropriate county board member, and those will be asked via the county board. We did receive a few questions, and by the April 1st deadline that we requested, and those were forwarded to the team. I would like to deal with those questions first, and I'll read the individual questions and go with that if that would be appropriate. Okay, thank you. Again, welcome this evening. Please come forward if you would. Thank you. I think we're beginning to all know you, but for the record, would you please state your name? Sure.
Yeah. Dennis Kimmy of Kimmy & Associates.
Chuck Reefstick, Gorski Reefstick Architects.
And I'm Jim Gleason with GHR Engineers.
Would any of you want to make a short statement before we get started with the questions?
Just as long as we get done before the hail and the storm comes.
I appreciate that.
No,
Okay.
thanks for having us back. We appreciate the opportunity to answer your questions.
We do value your time. We appreciate your willingness to dedicate your time to help us out with this. And unfortunately, we'll probably be calling on you more in the future.
All right.
But this is just part of the process, and we're thankful that you are willing to do that. I'll start reading by reading some of these questions. And one of them kind of alluded a little bit to what the public Mr. Pereira just talked about, and noted that we should have an executive summary and breakdown of cost. How do you want to address that issue?
Oh. Yeah, as far as the executive summary was concerned, we basically consider that to be the PowerPoint presentation. That's about as concise a summary as you're going to find, with all the bullet points covering all the areas, all the graphics, all the dollars in there. You know, certainly we could have translated that to a separate document, but there didn't seem to be a point to do it. So at least from our point of view, I mean, if what we gave you was an executive summary when we did that presentation.
Does the committee have any questions?
Yeah, in terms of, I don't know, I know the report in full is on the web page, but, for those who want a quicker summary, another idea is to turn that presentation into a PDF file and put that on your web page as well. And people could get the summary points quicker before they read, assuming they read the big document,
Would that be reasonable? That would be very helpful if you
Yeah.
would do that.
Yeah, well, did we give you a PDF of it?
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
We'll take care of it then.
All right.
All right, well, thanks for pointing that out.
And regarding the construction cost breakdown, part of that question, I have that which we can pass out to you.
Yeah, well, we're happy to give, but go ahead, Chuck. I was going to say, we're happy to give that to you, but we were kind of remarking on the irony that more often than not, when we do these studies and we give detailed breakdowns, the complaint is that we don't give a summary and that we gave them too much information. So we kind of went the route of, well, we'll break it down to its essence in terms of what the big pieces and parts are. What Chuck is handing out is a little bit more delineated. So, for example, where there was a single cost cited for the renovations at the satellite, this breaks it down per piece of the building or component of the building.
Any questions?
So just to show you what you have there, at the bottom of those three columns, 3-year maintenance, option 1, option 2, those numbers are the same as that first line of costs in that PowerPoint presentation that show base construction costs as if it were bid today. Then, as you might recall, in that PowerPoint, we showed then another set of costs called soft costs, which include fees, furnishings, things like that. Then we added on escalation numbers to account for the fact that it might not be bid today, but down the road a few years. And then at the tail end of that was then a contingency, just because it's very early in the process. And so I think we showed -5 to plus 15% contingency on that, or -10 plus 15, something like that.
Yeah. Because sometimes you actually do get a lower bid.
Yeah.
We've had bids on jails that have been as much as 10% below, but that's more rare. But that's part of the reason we took the lower range as well as the higher range.
Now, backing up this even, there's several more pages of more detailed costs that resulted in these numbers. So, I mean, there's quite a bit of cost data that went into the numbers that went into the report.
And those would be available if we need those.
If you want those, that's where, see, we're very early in the process, so there aren't drawings to measure, things like that, so we're making educated guesses on what we think would be included in those numbers, and so those are available if you want them, yes. It's about another 15 pages.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yeah, I have a question about this handout, if that's okay. I'm looking at the downtown building section, the 3-year maintenance column.
Yep.
For the 3-year maintenance repairs, it has $52,300 313. My question is, in option one, there's building envelope repairs, and I'm curious whether that 52,313 for a 3-year span covers envelope repairs that would be necessary to be done in a 3-year period.
No,
So
that
there-
52,000 does not.
So there should probably be building envelope repairs in the 3-year maintenance period, because my experience is we have building envelope problems on a regular basis in the downtown facility.
Yeah, the approach that we took on this was that we were doing the Band-Aid, well, there are two eventual outcomes. One was retiring that building, and then one was doing a full-scale renovation. The 3-year maintenance was more like the Band-Aid things, get the roof fixed, and there were a couple other things which I can look up here in a minute. The absolute, well, we think all those repairs ought to be done if you're going to stay in that building any length of time. But since we were going to possibly abandon it, we were trying to do the minimum, sink the minimum amount of money into it to keep it dry for a period until you were,
So it does have some envelope.
well.
Components to it.
Yes, I'm sorry. I
Okay.
guess, yeah, roof was in it. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
All right, thank you. That's what I wanted to clear
yeah,
up.
correct.
Other questions? Mr. Kebler?
So in that same token, Mr. Quisenberry hit on something I was noticing as well. We are going to have to do something with the downtown facility no matter what. So wouldn't we theoretically for option two have to do the exact same thing? Add that cost in there to make sure that building's not going to crumble until we figure out what we're going to do with it?
Well, the answer to that would be how long you're expecting to keep it. With this report, we assumed the process might move into the master plan might be realized sooner rather than later, okay? So we felt in option two assumed that we would be out of that building in 3 years. You know, construction would start here at the satellite. We'd be able to move the inmates out of that facility and into the new facility in a 3-year period. Again, minimum, trying to sink the minimum dollars into it, knowing it was going to be retired.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, the 3-year maintenance is basically something that's going to happen either way, with option one, without option one, with option two, without option. We're talking about $2.5 million regardless of anything. Is that the right way to read that?
That's our opinion, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank
mhm.
you.
Yeah, especially with the repairs needed at the satellite. I mean,
Right.
because that's in the long-term plan, so you ought to take care of some things before they get worse.
So option one and two are in addition to what has to happen either way.
That's
but the-
correct.
That's how I should read that.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, the next question came from a board member, and it was a suggestion to, as an alternative, an option that may come up later down the road. But her question was, why couldn't we upgrade the existing satellite jail to handle various classes of male inmates, B, house all female inmates at the youth detention facility, and C, upgrade the sheriff's office and downtown jail so the downtown jail would serve as a youth detention facility?
Okay.
Would you like to comment on those questions?
Sure, sure. Well, as far as upgrading the existing satellite jail, one of the things we did in our evaluation, after we identified the classifications of inmates that were there and the general needs that are associated with those inmates, we did go back and look at the existing facilities and say, what's the best use of those housing pods? The best use of those housing pods, the way they're designed with large densities, double occupancy cells and double tier cell housing unit arrangements, is for more general populations. The needs that we had with regard to the special needs inmates, you know, those are things that we talked about in the presentation and in the report that are more appropriate in terms of single occupancy cells, single level housing unit development where we weren't having people go up and down stairs and hanging over railings and things like that. So our assessment is that those existing housing pods were good for general populations, not those special needs, which is why we suggested the special need pod, because there was no housing unit, in our opinion, either the downtown jail or the satellite jail that were suitable to meet those needs. So that's why we didn't, when they say various classes of inmate, I'm inferring that they mean all these different classifications that we have. As far as housing all the female inmates at the youth detention facility, one comment I'll make right off the top, it was never in our scope to involve the youth detention facility for that purpose. In general, could it be used that way? Scale-wise, it's about a 40-bed facility. The female population in the last 4 years, not counting 2014, has fluctuated between 11 and 31. So at least initially, it seems like it might be the right size. And it does have subdivisions where you could identify different classifications of female offender and separate them for the housing units. The first problem that arises then is, what do you do? And I know 3C relates to this, but let me get there first. Backing up a second. I think another issue that you have to consider, if you remember, we were looking at the impact of consolidating all your facilities versus keeping them separate, and found a pretty significant dynamic of staff efficiency, service delivery efficiency, service delivery including things like food, laundry, healthcare, programs, et cetera. It would have been counterintuitive for me to look at options that continued to keep you separate, particularly now creating what amounts to a small jail, which by nature would be very staff inefficient, just by its nature alone. So I think we probably, even if that was within our scope to look at that facility, we probably would not have concluded that it's a good idea to, again, split your facilities, split your staffing, split all your services and your service providers. As far as upgrading the sheriff's office in downtown, and I should mention one other thing. When it gets to 3C, I know in the ILPP report, they recommended that that be considered, and one of their recommendations that I found really distasteful was the idea then that the juveniles would be kicked into trailers. Now, if you look at all the populations within the system that you have to deal with, when you talk about juveniles, there's a heightened concern for the quality of the environment, the impact of the environment on people. So going backwards, to me, into a trailer mode where your housing is in trailer-like configurations, which I don't know if you've seen the temporary kind of trailers that are used for detention. This is not, they're usually dorm style where the kids are all packed in, and then if you have program space, it's another trailer at another location, and you get into these really temporary subgrade facilities. So I thought that was personally a horrible recommendation. Now, going on to the idea of the youth detention facility, again, when you consider the character of the facilities, you know, going to that old style, small double-tier units with shrunken day rooms, I would not recommend that be the nature of the facility into which we put our youth offenders. Additionally, you get into all the extraordinary costs of renovating that to make it fit again for security detention. That was the idea, if you remember, we essentially rejected when we moved on to the second part of our study. We rejected that idea of going with adult. And in my mind, just in a simple terms, if it wasn't good enough for adults, it's definitely not good enough for juveniles in terms of what you want to achieve with juveniles and the impression you want to leave. So that would be kind of an overview response to those questions.
Thank you. We'll go on to the question number 3. What would it cost to add these scenarios? A, maintenance on the downtown jail and satellite jail to make serviceable for the next 5 years. B, phased approach over an X number of years. I'm thinking of stage construction, maybe that's what that question refers to. And C, the use of prefab pods, cost savings to do so. Would prefab pods be appropriate for our use?
I might address kind of A and B a little bit together. We can certainly look at whatever time frame needs to happen with the downtown facility to keep it operational. Now, I would suspect that that 52,000 number might grow if we're trying to keep it in operation longer. I think the key is to figure out with the county's financing and how money might come online to do various improvements, what that number really is, and not try to guess at 5. If it's, if it's 3, great, it's probably not going to be 3 anymore. If it's 5, is it 7, is it 10? And then look at how these other things might come. Mechanical systems are probably going to be really in critical condition at that time. So if we could work on what that number is when we know what the budgeting phasing would be for the project, I think that would be best answered at that time. But certainly, you can always keep repairing things. Jim, I know you had some.
Yeah, let me just add a couple of things about this 3-year. That came out of a kind of a time sequence scenario that had to do with funding and how long it took to get construction going, based on a bunch of assumptions, essentially. So that's where the 3 came from. And what we did when we came up with this list of 3-year repairs, we had like a trouble list of all the things that are going wrong in the downtown facility. And basically what we said is, okay, these and these things have to be fixed right now. And, it's stuff like the generator needs to be overhauled or it's not going to work. So that's one of the things that makes up that list. But there is a whole pile of things where it just says, fix it when it breaks. And what we're going to see there is an increasing number of things getting broken and having to be fixed on an emergency basis because we're not planning for it. So, we can stretch these things out and kind of play, but in a lot of ways, we're guessing at when things are going to fail. Statistically, we know those systems are beyond their life. Do we know exactly what day they're going to expire? No, we don't. So I don't know if that helps, but maybe I'm going to add a little detail to that.
Talk about the pod.
Oh, yeah, the 3C down there was use of prefab pods and cost savings to do so. Well, in terms of whole housing pods, which, if you remember how we described them, it's the cells or sleeping areas, day rooms, showers, associated exercise space, all the things that we're recommending for pods. There really are not pods of the style out there that we could buy that are a complete package of all those things. You can buy concrete cells and pre-made concrete or steel cells and have them shipped to a site and assembled and arranged, but it's just that cell part that's like that. From my point of view, that's a decision down the road when you've actually got a design down there, and it's just like any other material or equipment consideration that you look at, and you consider whether or not it makes sense. But it's not really a shortcut or an alternate solution. It's just a material and equipment choice down the road where, and when you consider it's not just an issue of cost, it's an issue of the quality of the environment. I've always objected when I've been in the steel cells and the concrete cells, the acoustics are terrible. And so when you're trying to make intercom communications with people, you get a large echo effect. Whenever the door slams, it echoes in those cells. And so, there's environmental considerations when you get into prefab cells and things like that. But going back to the cost picture, where they really pay off cost-wise, and when you're doing a mega facility, and you're doing a 1,000-bed facility and you're ordering 1,000 of the cells or 500 double cells, when you have that economy of scale is when you start to make a benefit. But with the size of the additions we're making and the variety of housing types, especially the special need housing types that we were getting into, I'm not sure that we would find that trying to find a set of prefab cells would get us any cost advantage because they'd be coming in too small a number. And they're usually all transported over rail, so there's not people here who make them. So you got to buy them from somewhere else, transport them by rail. And if we're ordering 4 or 5, 10 each of 4 or 5 different cells, there's probably not going to be any economic advantage at all to it. Now, the closest thing you get to total housing units is that there are temporary trailer facilities. And I emphasize the word temporary again, and it's kind of like what I was mentioning with respect to the trailers that ILPP was recommending. People do the trailers, but they usually do it when they're in crisis situations, and they have them maybe for 3 to 4 years tops while they're waiting for a building to be done. But they get beaten up and pretty run down, and they're usually in dormitory style from the beginning. There are other kind of things. I've seen people do inflatables. where it's kind of like the tents that you see at the university for the practice fields when they used to have the inflatable. Dana probably knows all about that sort of thing. And you have a permanent inflatable, and then within it, you basically create these massive dormitories. That's the type of thing that state prisons do in the face of big-time overcrowding. I don't think that's appropriate here, nor do we want to get into that type of thing. So I don't know that there's really anything out there that's under that prefab heading at the scale of what we're talking about that makes any significant cost difference and may cost more and have a worse result by the time we're done.
Questions? Okay, then move on to item 4. So if we can't get funding for the complete upgrade, can this project be staged over 5 to 10 years? And if so, what would a staged construction plan look like? And what will we need to do with the downtown jail in the meantime?
You want to try it first?
Sure. Certainly, the project can be phased. And maybe a simple way to look at potential phases are the way the costs were broken down on this list, is because this is kind of by area of the building. And then I would assume the large number in that, the whole east addition, could be phased in pieces as well. So I think there's a lot of phasing options. But again, I think, we need to kind of work with the financial plan too and figure out, just what makes sense to do. Now, keep in mind that these costs are broken out by area of the building, but that doesn't mean that doing, say, the Pod A renovation for $335,000, there might be something somewhere else that has to be done to help support that. I mean, our costs were really just broken out by area, and there might be some carryover into some other areas. But that could be a general group of projects to accomplish the master plan over time. Does that make sense? Okay. Was there a second part of that?
Well, yeah, related to the downtown jail, I think, the biggest thing as far as the downtown jail and getting it out of it is to basically get replacement beds. And we also have the need, I think probably above all when it comes to beds, of getting those special needs beds. So while you can break the pieces apart like Chuck was saying, I think it's also an issue of prioritizing, and to me, that would be a priority to address that critical problem. But as you add beds, then you're able to shut down that downtown facility from a jail point of view. And then you go from there on the other items that we have.
With regard to phasing, I guess I just don't see, maybe you could help me understand. Assuming that option 1 is correct or option 2, who knows? Let's just say one of them is. I see where we want to go and where we need to go. But to phase this in as far as from a cost perspective to the community, obviously one method maybe of funding it is through bonds, maybe creation of some additional tax. But either way, whether you try to phase it or you just simply say we're committed, you're going to pay for this. I'm not sure what the advantage would be to phasing economically, other than I suspect we could incur some cost if we don't phase it correctly, if we don't identify where our most expensive problems could be lying that may surface while we're waiting for the 7th year before we begin phase 4A. Then suddenly we're incurring some costs that we never would have incurred had we just simply moved forward initially and retired, say, the old jail, say that was where the problem was occurring. So from your experience, I guess I was probably more of a prelude to my thinking. From your experience, and maybe I have to be cautious how I ask this, not to put you on the spot.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you see potential landmines or pitfalls that we could be walking into by trying to create a phasing as opposed to simply making a commitment up front to move forward and seeking that funding, assuming we can. And if we did the phasing over some number of years, 10 years, 15 years, could this actually, from your experience, end up costing us much more than it would have had we just not moved forward?
Yeah, I'll start, and Chuck, you can amplify on it. But yeah, I think there's two premiums that you'll pay. There's the inherent premium when you break things in parts and you do small pieces where you're reconstituting all of your contractors for little parts rather than doing large parts and being there a while and doing things. There's also the premium of inflation. You know, so if you stretch something out 5 to 10 years that you could have done in 2 or 3 years, you're going to pay those increased and delayed costs. The other, well, I guess really there's a third premium we could cost. You know, interest rates now are as low as they're ever going to be. If they go anywhere, they're going to go higher. So, you know, it's probably a fairly good guess that bond sales are going to come with a higher interest premium in the future than they are right at this moment in time. So there's all of that. The other thing is that from, again, an operational point of view, you deny yourself capabilities. You know, so for example, one of the things that really stuck out to us other than housing was how badly laid out the intake area was, the booking area, and how poor an environment that was and how poorly it handled the people going through there. Well, if that's in phase 13 or well down the road, you'll have your new beds, but you'll still be taking people in through those inadequate facilities. We won't get the additional classroom space for programs as fast. So there's sort of an operational programmatic premium that you would pay as well. Yeah. I don't know, Chuck.
Question 5, I think, is somewhat redundant in many ways.
Yeah, probably true.
But it said, I noticed a lot of severe cracking in the floor throughout the satellite jail and saw the deterioration of showers in one area. How much rehab will be needed to maintain the satellite jail as is? Or 2, what would we need to do to build on new pods and a sheriff's administrative pods and assure ourselves that both the old edition as well as the new will last 50 years?
Tackle the cracks.
Well, and maybe I wasn't clear on this question, but maintaining the satellite jail as is, I mean, I think that's that 3-year, you got to do that 3-year maintenance cost. And I guess that's the way I interpreted that question. Regarding the floor cracking, yes, we saw that too. It's our understanding from talking with folks that that has been there almost from the beginning and is probably due to not very good compaction under it. It was our opinion, based on visual observation, that it wasn't a structural problem. It's unsightly. You can't really fix it. You can't put a coat of something over it because it'll crack too. And regarding the showers, there are deteriorated showers, and the costs of those were not in our drawings because we understood that to be an ongoing maintenance project that the jail staff were attacking and trying different things on. With regard to 5A, that second part, build on new pods and a sheriff's administration pod, again, maybe I'm not clear, but I think that's what option 2 suggests, that the sheriff's offices go on there for about $6.2 million. Maybe I'm not understanding, but if there's something else to that question, I guess.
Does it have to do with what you have to do to the existing building to add those things?
Yes, that would be a question. And
Okay.
and also, in your opinion, can we fix the satellite jail as it exists today to accommodate the new pods and have both have an expected life expectancy of about 50 years?
I guess the one thing that's still, the big question that's still out there is what is wrong with those precast panels, and that study is ongoing, and I think we'll know a lot more when John Fraunhofer finishes that report. In our 3-year maintenance, we had shown the repairs of those panels that were recommended in the Wiss-Janney-Elstner report. So, and as I recall, it's been a while since I've read that report, they had some comfort that with those repairs, those panels would last. The materials used on that facility ought to last 50 years. I mean, you got to replace a roof about every 20 years and other maintenance issues. But from a material durability standpoint, the materials are right, and those would probably be similar hard materials that we would use for construction of an addition too. Now, when we laid out just the real general floor planning, we did stay away from those panels, set new additions away from the existing panels in case those problems were more or were worse than was indicated in the Wiss-Janney report. So, yeah, I think that would be the goal, and that's what our cost estimates would reflect, is a facility that ought to last that length of time.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? All right, that goes through the list of the questions that we have. The members of the committee have any other questions I'd like to ask? Okay, Deb, thank you.
I think our consultants are prepared to speak to the issues that were raised in public participation, so hopefully they could be allowed to address those issues.
Okay, would you please do that,
Yeah,
team?
thank you. Yeah, I'd like to just comment on a couple things. Again, when it comes to the scope that we had, our scope did not include doing a criminal justice system study that looks at ways to reduce the jail population. Now, I appreciate what the young man pointed out about our skills, and I kind of wish he was back with us in 2012 when we were proposing on that subject, because he might have given us an endorsement on that area. But in that, it was not within our scope. We did not address those issues. If you remember, again, that's what the ILPP study was to do for you. That was looking at alternatives to incarceration. So that was not our mission. Wasn't in the scope, wasn't written in the RFQ, and it wasn't negotiated out in our scope. So that's a non-issue as far as that's concerned for us. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up, and there's a handout for you, and it's not only because of what the students wrote in their report, but also what I've heard at other meetings like this. You know, the young man refers to a discrepancy between his data analysis and ours. I would argue that both pieces of data are correct. The problem is the young man misinterprets or misunderstands how to use jail data and how that affects jail population. So I've prepared a handout for you. I don't know if they have extra copies for the young man back there. I don't know if you've had a chance to breeze through it, but I just did this today. There's a fundamental difference between bookings and jail population. Bookings basically just record the people who hit the booking area. And so it's quite easy to say that 15% of the people hit the booking area are there. The missing ingredient in the analysis the young folks did was the length of stay of the people who are booked. To get to a jail population, you need to identify all the detention days involved, and that's a product of multiplying all of the bookings by the average length of stay of the population. It's that you get the analysis. So, for example, I won't go through all the narrative with you, bore you, but if you can at least look at the little tables down there, little calculations. And what you'll see basically is two calculations. And what the young man is referring to and what his work is essentially that first table, where there's an analysis, and if you say if you had 100 arrests, or example, or bookings, and 15 of them were for people on traffic offenses, you could conclude that 15% of the people booked were booked for traffic offenses, and that would be correct. But it doesn't tell you about jail population. The second calculation gives you an example where, for example, you have 15 bookings and 85 other bookings, just like the first table, but the 15 traffic offenders only stay an average of 2 days each. On the other hand, the example shows that the 85 other people booked stay, say, an average of 15 days apiece. When you multiply the bookings times the length of stay, You'll see the example here, the traffic offenders accrued 30 detention days. All the others accrued 1,275 detention days. So what that really, and that really is what represents the jail population. So that's where you can get a number like, even though 15% of the bookings are people on traffic offenses, the actual average daily population in the jail is only 2%, not 15%. And when you do a snapshot, built into the snapshot is the length of stay factor, because it is a snapshot of the populations. Technically speaking, when you have 365 days of snapshots, you basically have accumulated all the detention days in that year. We did a sample of 20, partly because, if you recall, we took it from the classification data, and they've only been recording that for several months at the point we got in there. They didn't have the classification data for even a year at that point in time. So we took the sample from what was there. But that's why I say, I mean, there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how booking data really applies to detention days in a jail population itself.
So why use booking data instead of looking at how many people are in the jail and for what kind of
Yeah, well, it's a great
offenses? I
question.
mean,
Yeah, there's a couple
what's the
reasons.
point?
Yeah, there's a couple reasons why we collect and use booking data. Number one, if we have total detention days for a year, for example, and we have the total number of people booked, that's how we calculate the average length of stay. So when you've seen other reports say, well, your average length of stay in the jail is 11.5 days or 20.6 days, that's how you get it. You divide total detention days by total bookings. The other reason we want to gather booking data is in designing an intake and release area, we need to know the volume going through it. So that helps you make decisions about how much occupancy you have in a booking area, whether it be a holding cell or an open waiting area or a detox area or whatever the case may be. The booking helps you gauge the flow through that particular part of the building.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with you getting booking data, I get the point.
Right.
But if I'm trying to figure out who is in the jail at any given
Right.
point in time, why rely on an indirect measure of booking times, length of stay, and so on,
That-
instead of just
yeah.
looking at who is at the jail today, whatever your snapshot,
Yeah, well,
random day.
that's why we used the snap. They were the ones that used the booking data. We used the snapshot.
Okay, so your 2%, or whatever your number was
Right.
based on not the booking and
Right.
inferring, it's
Right.
based on your snapshot?
Yes.
Okay,
Who was
thank you.
who was in fact
in the
in
jail
jail on
for
20
what?
days spread over time.
Thank you.
So those 20 days were over a period between April and July?
Right, April 1 and July 31.
Can you give me a rough idea of how those 20 days were spread out? Were they
Yeah,
just here and there or clumps here and there?
We took them randomly, not consecutively, and we tried to have a balance between Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays. The only thing that limited us a little bit is that as they're developing their system, they didn't have a snapshot for every day. So we were a little bit down on Sundays and Saturdays because they weren't doing them as frequently, mainly because the classification officer wasn't there on Saturday and Sunday. So basically, we tried to spread it fairly evenly over time and over different days because they reflect different things going on in the jail.
Okay, and because I'm not completely sure of the dynamics of the community, but April, May, June, July, this place is a different place than it is September through,
Right.
the fall semester or the spring semester.
Right.
Are you concerned that the period that you picked is not predictive of the other part of the year?
Maybe a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, it probably would be nice to update it, but again, the basic limitation we were fighting against is, if you recall, one of the consequences or outcomes of the ILPP study was the recommendation that you develop a new classification system. You then, after that, had a consultant come in and help them develop it. They were then starting to figure out how to record the data, so we had a limited data set, but absent that data set, we had nothing else. Yeah.
Yeah, this may be a little outside of where you guys are, but when I look at numbers in the jail, I'm with most people that the pending traffic, the pending misdemeanor, those to me are not necessarily people that putting in jail, in my mind, for the most part, is efficient. When these people do end up going through booking, most of them bail out and they walk out the door. That's kind of why your numbers are different, I think, the story maybe. When that happens, the people that do end up staying in the jail because of traffic, because of pending misdemeanor, is that because they cannot afford to bond out? Is that because they're not getting bond? What's the situation there?
Yeah, that I don't know, because we didn't look into that. I'd have to refer you back to the ILPP study.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think one of the important pieces that may be missing is, have we been in discussion with the Finance Committee? Because as I see Phase 3, or Year 3 maintenance is 2.5 million, and then Option 1 is 26 million, and and Option 2 is 27, almost 27.5 million. Has there been a discussion of where this money is going to come from? I don't think it's going to come from this committee, but it would be coming from the Finance Committee saying, well, the Facilities Committee thinks that we should go with Option 1, and I think we could, bond out on X amount of dollars for a period of 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. Has there been a discussion with the Finance Committee regarding these decisions?
Not with us. So I don't know if you've had one internally or not, but not with us.
So, I mean, I would love to have the Cadillac, but if I can't afford the Cadillac, or I could afford anything, nothing's going to happen. So my discussion is, we're having a discussion on what we would like to see happening, but unless the funds are there, I think the discussion is not going anywhere. And to me, that's why I don't ask any questions, because we just keep going around and around and around and around. And, it's kind of frustrating, because unless we know where the money's coming from and we have secured those fundings, I think we have excellent rating, financial rating, I believe is AA or AAA. And so if the Finance Committee or the county board or the administration says, hey, guys, we have the money to do this, and then the Facilities Committees could look at what is the best way to invest X amount of money on Phase 1, Phase 2, or Option 1, Option 2, or 3-year maintenance. But unless we know what's there, what are we really doing? Other than, I think the plans that you all have done, Dennis, and the engineers and the companies that we've hired to look at alleviating us of this mess that's been ongoing for over 30 years is admirable, but nothing has moved forward. We've been talking about it now since I've been on the county board the last 6 years, and we're still here discussing that. So I know that Quisenberry had indicated if we do nothing, which we haven't done nothing in 6 years, we're still bogged down with the problem. I hope the building, Dan Walsh, doesn't collapse, and you and the inmates. But to me, it's a little frustrating to be talking about hypothetical situations. We need to probably take this issue with the Finance Committee to see how much money there's there, and then if there is 10 million, and then we could know what 10 million could buy. And then what is the option for $10 million, Phase 1, Option 2, and 3-year maintenance? What could we buy with $10 million? And what could we do to satisfy or complement repairs in the satellite as well as in the downtown area? We decided to scrap the downtown area, the downtown jail, and hopefully, move on to one consolidated facilities. But I don't think that's going to be possible. And it's just more of a comment, not a question. So.
Mr. Kibler, please.
Hi, guys. So a couple things. When it comes to measurements and whatnot, I don't want us to get into analysis paralysis here, but when looking at these metrics, it would also be very interesting to see the median of these as opposed to the average to remove out the outliers. Because the reason I bring that up is if we want to predict, at least in my mind, if we want to predict future total incarceration, especially as we come up with a better classification system or we find ways to remove those outliers, then the theoretical projections will be a little bit misguided by using average as opposed to median. So I'd be curious to know if there, and I'm not saying go do this, but I would, if someone were to come to me and say, these metrics say we need to build X, I would probably say, well, median would probably be a better measure to determine predictability. Also doing regression analysis to do predictions. So that brings me to the second point of, you made a really good point that these are stats based upon a model that was just being developed. We've now had 9 months to get that model going. I'd be really curious to see if those measures are appropriate today as they were then, and how good we've become or worse we've become since that point, because it's going to take us a few years to get probably the funding to do any sort of major construction. That's just my internal thought. Therefore, as we continue to improve or degrade, I'm assuming improve, Mr. Sheriff, then what will that do to the cost? Because maybe we can reduce cost based upon better prediction and better modeling of those inmates. And the final piece, again, this is now me really throwing the wrench into it. Given what Governor Rauner's trying to do with reduction of inmate population within the jail system in the state of Illinois, what rumblings or things are you hearing with respect to how that's going to be done? And the biggest fear that I have is that what will actually happen is a delay between when an inmate is sentenced to the state penitentiary, state house, will actually be staying in our county jail a little bit longer, which we're going to probably have to account for as well. So can you give some insight onto more that latter piece about what rumblings or what else is potentially down the pike that we need to be considerate of?
Yeah, I can speculate just based on some of the things I've seen in the past. I don't know what the governor's going to do. To me, it's an untenable situation when you have 45,000 inmates in 33,000 beds, and they're not great beds to start with. You may not be aware of this, but probably about, 2 or 3 years ago here out in California, they did something that I've seen states do in the past. And that is when they have an overcrowding problem, one of the ways they address it is they change the law and kick part of the problem down to the counties. And I've seen states like Kansas, Ohio, Minnesota do things like this. Sometimes they do it under the heading of community corrections. They do it for other reasons, but what'll happen, or what's happened as an example in Kansas and also in California, low-level felony offenders who are sentenced, say, up to 2 years' time can now, will spend their time in county jails. Well, that significantly changes a population. An example, we designed the Wichita jail in Sedgwick County, Kansas, and we designed a 420-bed facility that at the time they thought was too great in size. The state changed the law, kicking those low-level felons back to the counties. They had us back there 5 years later designing a 600-bed addition, most of it driven by that single law change. I guess if I had a worry, my worry in our state is that they do something similar to these other states, and their solution becomes our problem.
Quick follow-up on that. With that in mind, and maybe this is more for the sheriff, based upon the classification system as well, do you feel that it's, I know you've not done any scientific research or data on this, but do you feel that after 9 months of having this system in place, things have gotten better with respect, and it's actually, these numbers are not indicative of today? Or do you feel that they're fairly on target with what we have with these numbers that were generated 9 months ago?
The classification system deals mostly with how we handle them once they're in-house. It really doesn't decide on who's going to be kept in the jail or who's going to get out sooner. It's mostly an internal thing for their own safety and our officers. That's what this whole classification is about. I think it is working better. We are getting more fights in the jail, but that's because we're having more problems in the community in terms of the violence. But if we didn't have the classification system, I suspect we'd even have more fights than we already do. But we're experiencing more than we ever had in my tenure, but that's because it's reflective of the community. The other thing I want to add, and this is long before my time, But Dennis, I'm sure you've heard about it. At one time, misdemeanant sentence people were sent to DOC, and Illinois changed the law and said, you will keep your own misdemeanants.
Yes, that's correct.
Probably, what, 25,
Yeah, that
30
happened in
years
the early
ago?
80s. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I hope that answers your question.
I have a question for Deb. Deb, this money, would we need to raise taxes or have a referendum regarding finances? Because I'm very concerned about the finances, and that has not been discussed. And it probably will never be discussed in this committee meeting. I think it needs to be discussed in finance. And, you know, Gary had mentioned perhaps raising, sales tax or property tax or seeking other alternatives to revenue. So that, because the pot is not getting bigger until we do something in addition to have this new revenue. Or we just gonna go ahead and continue to bond out like we did with the nursing home and with the courthouse? How deep are we in debt, and could we afford more debt with this facility?
Mr. Rosales, may I address that?
Sure.
I'd really think we might not want to put our administrator in the position of trying to decide the finances and whether or not we should or will need a tax increase. We will be further on this evening addressing some of the questions you've had earlier. And what we are proposing tonight, what we had the team come to us tonight, was to answer some questions. The jail is what we're going to do with the jail over the coming years is only part of our facility problem. And how we're going to fund facilities, we need a better handle on what our overall problems are, including the jail, which is a major portion of it. So later in this evening, we will be addressing and requesting an RFQ for services of an architect/engineering team to do an inventory of our needs of all of our buildings, and including some of the additional. We will be doing a little bit more on the envelopes of some of the jail and that sort of thing, as well as a nursing home. But we feel like right now the main thing that we should go forward with is a study of needs of the entire system of buildings, and try to have that report done by the end of this fiscal year. And at that point in time, we'll be able to sit down with cost and also identify what money we might have available at that time, and then make a determination whether or not we will need to go to the public with seeking additional funds. Mr. Rosales.
So then what you're suggesting, Gary, is that we put this in addition to all the other many needs that we have in maintenance of all of our buildings as one addition to what we already have, and then look out and seek out additional funding for all buildings and the whole project and prioritize that as well?
That would be my vision of what I hope to see accomplished.
And then what would the engineers and Kemi would require from us at this juncture? I think they've answered all my questions. And I appreciate you all continuously coming out and continuously presenting and providing documentation upon documentation and putting it on the website and entertaining all questions and meeting with individual board members as well as community leaders. I appreciate that wholeheartedly. Where do we move from here? What decision has to be made tonight or on the county board for us to move forward? And I guess, Gary, you were indicating that there are other things on the agenda that we have to consider as well, because all of those deal with finances.
That's correct. Deb, would you like to help me with that in any?
I think that's quite correct, and I think looking at the finances while we're looking at all these facilities issues will occur. And how the board determines to proceed is going to depend on the combined conversation of all those issues.
Mr. Rosales?
So it's based on the most need or apparent need, or until it breaks down, or the emergency does occur, right? So is that what it's based upon?
I'm not sure I can answer that question.
At this point, the project that you have before you for just the jail, you do not have the resources available in the next 2 to 3 years to be able to issue that level of bonding for this project without going to the voters. So that's just a straight answer to that question. But the issue is you also have limitations in your financial ability to deal with all the other facilities issues, which you've been struggling with as a committee, which you're hoping to get a finite plan, financial plan for, with the recommendation that Mr. Maxwell is talking about that's later on the agenda. So combining all of that information and then determining how the board wants to proceed, I think is what you're looking at right now.
Thank you for the clarity, Deb, and that's all I was looking for. It was just shedding some light on my confusion at least, and it wasn't, and I apologize that I put you on the spot, but that was not my intention to put you on the spot. Thank you, Gary.
Mr. Anderson? Anybody else? Really appreciate you folks coming tonight. I think we'll conclude your portion of this agenda, and again, thank you very much, and we will be working with you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, one and all.
I suggest a 10-minute break right now. I'd like to call us back into session now at this point. Mr. Quisenberry has indicated and shown me evidence that we may be subjected to some severe weather here within the next hour. So hopefully we can expedite this, the rest of this agenda. The next item would be the approval of the Mental Health Board lease, which is attached.
So moved.
Second. Motion by Mr. Kibler, second by Mr. Hartke. All those in favor say, or pardon me, any discussion? I'm sorry, any discussion?
This is the memorandum of understanding, or?
This is an actual
Oh, the
lease.
lease. Excuse me.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Would somebody, do we want to put this on the consent agenda? Does anybody feel the need to do anything different? All right. So it passed unanimously. The next item would be the approval to release the request for qualifications for the facility condition assessment, documentation, and capital planning study for the County of Champaign survey. This is a needs assessment of our complete building inventory. They'll give us a better idea of what our long, short-term, and intermediate needs are with respect to the physical plant and the building inventory, building envelopes. And the second of this was also, the same architect will be lined up then to do our certification of any ADA work. So we're doing it's a kind of a twofold RFQ here, lining up the person to do the the ADA work in the future, as well as the immediate goal of getting a needs assessment of our buildings by the end of this fiscal year, which would be in November and December. Are there any questions? Rachel.
Do we have any idea of how much that could possibly cost?
I don't have any idea. I think that's part of why we're doing an RFQ.
But the RFQ is not going to come in with cost, it's just qualifications, and it's only the negotiations that we're going to actually get to cost. So let's say it comes in at $400,000. So that's why I'm asking, like, can we get, is it 100,000, is it 300, like, what are we talking? I mean, is it in the budget? Is it within our ability to pay?
Well, we've had something along these lines done for the nursing home with the complete MEP report that you received there. And what was the cost of that, Dana?
24,000?
Yeah. So I'm sure that we're talking six figures, but I think we're talking in closer, hopefully, to, like 100,000. But we don't, there's not a real strong basis upon which to base that. It is not in the budget. It will require a budget amendment to do it. But this is something that the board has talked about for a decade, and it's critical for moving forward. So,
Gary? Mr. Kibler?
I think this is a great idea, therefore I move that we adopt this RFQ.
Second. Moved by Mr. Kibler, second by Mr. Harkey. Further discussion? Dana?
So, just to help answer your question, two of our buildings, the Gorski, Restack, Kimming Associates, have already identified MEP envelope costs, which obviously the downtown jail and the satellite. We've already done all of the MEP work at the nursing home. So the building envelope there needs to be looked at and studied, but that's 2 3/4 big pieces, components of whatever the total cost will be for doing our big buildings, so.
I was just gonna ask Dana to give me an idea of, like, the scope, how small of things are gonna be, is this gonna find? I mean, I assume roofs, major mechanicals, masonry, but what other kinds of things are we gonna expect to get on this list?
Basically, the entire envelope, so you're talking roofs, you're talking whether it's brick, whatever the materials are for the building, are they intact and holding and keeping water out and air? The mechanicals will be a thorough investigation, time, an estimate of lifespan based upon when they were put in and installed, what's happened to them since then, looking at controls. Most of our buildings are pneumatic controls, moving over to the digital world, which updated mechanicals will save the county thousands of dollars in utility savings. Obviously, there's an investment to be made, but we're seeing some of those benefits as we started those projects here at Brookins by moving in that direction. So they would identify all of those components.
Things like sidewalk, pavement, windows.
Windows, exterior skin basically of the building envelope, so it would be the entire thing. Parking lot, sidewalks. We already have an ADA study, so obviously this will be, parts and pieces will be included in that work as well as some other things, so.
To that end, maybe outside the scope of this RFQ, but I would be interested in IT audit at the same caliber to determine the overall health and wellness of our technologies and where we may go in the future. I think that falls under the purview of this committee, I think. Who would it fall under then? It would all be under finance. Okay, never mind. Thank you.
I like where you're headed with that, Jeff, because technology infrastructure is becoming the plumbing of our world. But we did have an IT audit done, 8 years ago? So that's a long time ago. So we would take that up in finance then, Deb? Okay.
Well, I'm certainly glad that this is on the agenda finally. I would remind my colleague over there that without the physical building to put your IT in. Your IT won't do you any good, so you need to take care of your buildings first. I have been, since I've been on the board, Deb can vouch for me or against me, whichever way you want to put it, we have never taken our building responsibility serious. And this is an opportunity to do that. I don't like what it's going to cost us. I think it costs us way too much money to do everything that we do over here. But whatever it is, we need to spend it and get on down the road so we know where we are. And this would be the first time that I know of that we really tackled all of our facilities to see really where we are and what needs to be done. And then the follow-up to that is, then we need to stay on it and fix what needs to be fixed when it needs fixed instead of waiting until it deteriorates worse. Thank you.
Are we ready to call a question?
Yeah, echoing John Jay, I think you're totally correct. Once we get everything under our list, and we could prioritize that, and then we know how much to bond out to fix the priorities and everything that's on that list. So I echo what you're saying.
I think I'll call a question at this time. Those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carried. The next item would be to approve the release of the invitation to bid, ITB 2015-003 Courthouse Window Replacement Project.
So moved.
Motion by Kibler,
Second.
second by Hartke. Further discussion? Hearing none, I would move the question. Those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carried. Now we'll go on to the facility director's report.
Thanks, Gary. First up, the precast concrete investigation, which most of you have known about. It came up earlier this evening. We started actually last Tuesday, the 31st of March. County Highway graciously dug 3 of the panels out for us at the bottom, not the dirt, not the entire panel, obviously, but the dirt at the base of the panel, basically a 12-foot wide by 6-foot wide and about 3 feet deep. So we exposed the connection point between the bottom of the panel and the foundation so that we could see that. Monday, this past Monday, April 6th, we had Pennell out, company who came out and specializes in concrete coring, cored 1-foot holes, 1 foot in diameter holes into the 3 panels that were chosen for the investigation. Right at the connection point, there are 2 connection points in each panel that attaches each panel at the base to the foundation itself. And then another company chipped out that core so we could actually see and look at that steel connection piece. In addition to that, that same company then chipped out the 4 pre-stressed strands. So we were able to take a look at it down at ground level, that pre-stressed strand that's in the concrete panel that gives its rigid form and gives it the ability to hold together each other as well as the roof, support the roof. Remember, this is a precast concrete structure. There's no steel superstructure within the building that these panels are adhered to. They support each other as well as the roof. Wednesday, after doing that on Monday, Wednesday we came back and forms were made, poured concrete to seal up those holes in those chipped away areas. We are waiting on a total finding, so in about 2 weeks we'll get a report from our engineer. The last component, which we hope to get done next week, is to investigate the connection point at the roof of those 3 panels. We'll actually come in and remove the EPDM rubber membrane so that we can see those connection points and see what's happening up there and get a better idea of how water is infiltrating each of the panels. Preliminary findings or observations that we saw out of the 3 holes and connection points at the base of those panels. Only 1 of those connection points, the steel itself, had any surface rust, a very positive sign. The connection was not hurt in any way. The other two were perfectly pristine. So those are very positive signs. There were some cracks that were noticed once we dug down. The interior of these precast panels has insulation that's about 2.5, 3 inches thick, and it goes down to about 6 inches from the bottom of the panel. And we saw some cracking on 2 of the 3 panels that we had exposed. So water has infiltrated the panels, and in that freeze-thaw condition that we have here during winter and spring in Illinois, obviously, the water has frozen and it's put pressure on the concrete and it's cracked it. It's not endangered the panel itself, but it's merely cracked the concrete from our observations. The pre-stressed strands that we exposed, there were 12 strands that we looked at, again, 4 in each panel. Only 2 of the 12 showed any corrosion. Those 2 happened to be the panels with the cracks at the bottom. So water obviously has gotten in there and impacted it. We will get a full findings, but we're fairly optimistic so far with what we've seen. We know that the panel joints need to be resealed. We'll have to work on that below ground as well. And then the sealing up these cracks that are within each of the panels can be done with an epoxy base and maybe a skim coat or something along those lines. But the engineer will throw us his ideas in the final report. So we'll have more for the next facility committee meeting in May and have hopefully a final report by then.
Dana, was all this done in-house?
No, it was not. The ERA was hired. You had seen the contract. That's approximately $24,000 for hiring ERA to do this work. We hired independently then Penhall, who did the coring. They were here for about 3 hours to core 3 holes. Deuce Construction was hired to come out and do the labor, the chipping, so forth, building the forms for the concrete. Their work is done, so they were here for 2 3/4 days. We had a couple other companies on hold in case we needed to do something with the steel, but when we took a look at it, there's no need to do anything there, so there'll be no costs for that. So we'll have some minor expenses for Penhall and Deuce, but that should be really the extent of it. County Highway is doing us a favor. We do those kinds of things back and forth. Took their operator about an hour and a half to dig 3 holes. It was fairly quick.
So the digging was done in-house?
Digging was done in-house with the county, and same process for covering up the holes here in the next week, hopefully, once Mother Nature allows us to throw the dirt back in.
Mr. Quist.
So Dana, if I could summarize, concrete's healthy, strands are healthy, only corrosion is where you might expect it to be exposed to the air. Cracks are the cause of ice getting into the insulation and pushing out on the concrete, but not affecting the structure of the wall.
Correct.
Is that a fair summary?
I think that's a fair summary.
So it's
but
not about to fall over?
It's preliminary.
Okay.
I don't believe that it's.
I'm not an engineer,
You're not an engineer. We thought you were.
computer engineer.
Okay. We'll get the final report, but it's very positive signs from what we've looked at in the last 2 days or 3 days. Still have to finalize the roof and look at those parts. We've got to find a way to keep water from getting into the panels is the bottom line. And if we're successful in doing that, that structure, I'm not an engineer either, but I think the engineer is very excited about the fact that this facility will be able to be maintained for a long period of time.
Mr. Quisenberry, there was another engineer there, and he observed pretty much what I want to confirm what what Dana just said, that I did get to take a good look at those joints, and the clips and the pre-stressing strands, and they all look fairly to be in pretty good shape. A slight amount of corrosion in some of the pre-stressing strands, but that very obviously was due to moisture towards the bottom of those panels. So I came away from there fairly optimistic. I don't think I will be going up on that roof and watching that part of it, but I will take their word for it, and I did come away myself more optimistic about the overall integrity of that building. Thank you.
Are they taking volunteers to go up on the roof and look at it? Because I might do that.
Can I call you on
Yeah.
a spur of the moment and have you go up there? We just don't know yet because of the weather, but we'll watch the forecast. But we didn't think we'd be able to get the the forms built and concrete poured on Wednesday either, but we managed, so. The second item is just a quick update on the nursing home water heater replacement. We are working with GHR, who's done a lot of work, obviously, at the nursing home. Nursing home is funding this. This project will be funded through them as well. We are meeting with the nursing home board Monday night to present them with a bid for water heaters that GHR is putting together. Should have it tomorrow. I talked to Jim earlier this evening, and it will be done in time to get to the nursing board by tomorrow afternoon. Our plan currently is to post the bid, providing the nursing home board finalizes it and approves it. April 17th, we have a bid opening on May 8th, work on the contract, and hopefully start to have the contractor mobilize about June 15th. Keep in mind, this is something you can't, we have to do these one at a time. These are 5 water heaters, if you'll remember. We have to do them one at a time, have to do them in a manner that the nursing home can still function and provide hot water, obviously, to the residents and staff within the building. So we'll work very closely with the nursing home management and GHR, and then whoever the vendor is that is selected through the bid process to remove the current water heaters and install new.
Questions? If not, thank you, Dana, and would move on to other business. Do we have any other business to come before us? If not, I'll go to the chair's report, which I don't have a chair's report. I would like to note that our future meeting will be Tuesday, May the 5th, 2015, and we will tour the County Highway Maintenance Building at 5:25 p.m. prior to the May 5th Facility Committee meeting. Under item 15, designation of items to be placed on the consent agenda, and I believe that would be item 9, approval of the mental health board lease. Are there any other things that need to be? If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved. Second. Motion by Kipling, second by Quisenberry.